Viewers, it's day 11 of the Middle East war and there is still no clear timeline for an end. The conflict is now spilling beyond battlefields and into global energy network. The UAE has shut down the Middle East's largest oil refinery after it was hit by a drone. The strike caused a fire at the site, which is capable of processing nearly 9 lakh barrels of crude a day. At the same time, confusion surrounds US President Donald Trump's strategy. Mr. Trump has been giving conflicting replies on when the war will end. First, he said American goals may be pretty well complete after telling House Republicans that we haven't won enough. Later, his own Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, confirmed that US has launched the fiercest attack inside Iran till date. Not just on the war timeline, it seems that Donald Trump is even unclear on oil and his stance on Iran. Time and again he suggested that there's no use of talks with Iran, but then contradicted his own statements by referring to his war against Iran as an excursion. Not to forget, the man who claims to be a peacemaker had fun sinking Iran ships rather than capturing them, is what he said in response to a statement that he made, quoting defense officials.
I said, why didn't we just capture the ship? We could have used it. Why did we sink them? He said, it's more fun to sink them. I said, they like sinking them better. Our country is doing really well. I mean, at a level that nobody thought. We took a little excursion because we felt we had to do that to get rid of some evil. And I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion.
For example, today will be yet again our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever.
Now, there's also been a wave of controversy around Trump's response to reports suggesting that a US missile struck a girls' school in Iran's Minab that killed at least 110 schoolgirls. Responding to a question about footage that allegedly shows a US Tomahawk missile hitting an Iranian military base located next to a primary school, Trump has said that he had not seen the video, but noted that the Tomahawk missile is used by Iran.
An American missile strike and a Tomahawk missile likely destroyed that Iranian girls' school. So will the U.S. accept any responsibility?
Well, I haven't seen it, and I will say that the Tomahawk, which is one of the most powerful weapons around, is used by, is sold and used by other countries, you know that. And whether it's Iran, who also has some Tomahawks, I wish they had more, but whether it's Iran or somebody else, the fact that a Tomahawk is very generic, it's sold to other countries, but that's being investigated right now.
On the other hand, Iran refuses to bow down. Iran's foreign minister has ruled out any future negotiations with the US, saying that talks with US is no longer on the agenda. In fact, escalating its stance, the IRGC has vowed that Iran will decide when the war ends, not the US, and that Iran is ready for months of war. Now, amidst the uncertainties, it's the rest of the world which is paying the price. The Strait of Hormuz, carrying nearly 20% of global oil, is choked. 157 vessels remain stranded and barely 45 ships have transited since the war began. Oil prices are violently oscillating from $73 on February 28th. They've shot up to $120 on March 9th and are now sliding to around $90 per barrel. The reason? Top energy facilities are being targeted. And this is, of course, what we've seen so far. In Saudi Arabia, it's the Ras Tanura oil refinery that has been targeted. In Qatar, it's the Ras Lafan Industrial City LNG facilities and the Mesaid Industrial City that has been targeted. In UAE, it is the Fujairah and Musafa oil terminals that have been at the receiving end. The Athenova oil tanker off the Khor Fakan coast has also been targeted. In Oman, fuel tankers at the port of Dugm and Salalah have been targeted. In Bahrain, the Bapco oil refinery has been damaged, and in Iran, is the Aqda CA oil depot that has been targeted, along with the Shahran oil depot that has also been targeted. In Israel, the Haifa refinery has also been at the receiving end of these attacks. It's also the citizens who are paying the price of this brutal war. What are we talking about? In Iran, 1,255 killed and 12,000 injured. In Israel, 13 killed and 2,000 injured. US has seen 8 killed and 18 injured. In Lebanon, 395 killed and 1,000 plus injured. In Iraq, 6 killed, dozens injured there as well. Now, the big question is the West Asia war over or is it just beginning? And who actually stands weaker on day 11 of the Middle East war?
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, let's take this across to our guest now. Joining us is Lieutenant General Raj Shukla. He's a defense expert and former army commander. We have Tatiana Kukreva, who's a narrative strategist based in Moscow. We have Arman Mahmoudia, research fellow at the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. Dr. Jeffrey Gunter is a former U.S. ambassador, and Sierra Claire is a foreign policy analyst joining us. Let me start with you first. Jeffrey Gunter, what exactly is going on? On the one hand, you have signals coming in from Trump, good evening, where he says that he's trying to, it sounds like he's trying to de-escalate and that the war is going to end. And then you have Pete Hegseth, who comes in a few hours later and then says, no, this is the hardest we've ever attacked Iran yet. Because there's so many confusing signals coming out from Washington, D.C., leading to more unpredictability and causing chaos across the world.
I think it's just pure brilliance. We all have read The Art of War. Besides when they say victorious warriors win and then they go to war, the other element is surprise. Trump always, the president, my former boss, always keeps his adversaries guessing. It's sheer brilliance. And anyone who feels any kind of remorse for the terrorists that we see in Iran, this is a terrorist state. They are the adversaries, they are the criminals, and any deaths and anything that we're seeing is really the responsibility of this Iranian regime, not the people, the Iranian regime. And any arguments to the opposite is merely the largest case of Stockholm Syndrome you will ever see. Okay. They are the captors.
Let me bring in Lieutenant General Raj Shukla on that note. Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, the question that would be on many people's minds is that what is going on? Because some of the statements coming in from Washington, D.C. have also been quite bizarre. For instance, saying that sinking ships is fun, according to the U.S. Defense Forces. Now, you don't expect, a senior politician, the president of a country, to be making these kinds of statements and talking about sinking Navy ships as being fun.
Well, Mr. Trump is what he is. We've known him for a pretty long time now. So let's get to the substantive issues. And here I think as we run into day 11, it would seem to me that even after 5,000 strikes, Iran has survived and Trump has not quite won. You know, the decapitation strikes and so on were a wonderful success. But see who has succeeded Ayatollah Khamenei, his son, Mujtaba. And Mujtaba is a candidate of the IRGC, which means that the core of the IRGC revolution network is back in business, which also means that if Mujtaba comes to power, or he is now the supreme leader, which means that the nuclear weapons program, the ballistic missile program, they will be rebuilt. They remain intact. So now, if the Americans have to really get the Iranians to surrender, they have to get into the regime change business. And here I would just take your mind back to Iraq. General Tommy Franks conducted his operations in 4 phases. 3 phases were brilliant successes. Where the Americans got into a quagmire was in the 4th phase. So I think this is where the Americans are stuck. They have done well so far, but regime change with 1 million plus, IRGC, besieged, the Artish, the regular military, is going to be a big challenge. And just the last point, now that the body bags are returning to the United States, I hear in the United States calls for public hearings by Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, to reveal all these details. What are your plans henceforth? So the very nature of democratic scrutiny in the United States will make this next phase of regime change a very difficult one. I think that's the true challenge. That is what the Trump presidency resides on. To me, it seems extremely difficult. If he can pull it off for some reason, well, it'll surprise me greatly.
All right, Sierra Claire, I'd like you to respond to that. What exactly is going on? Because now there's global oil prices which are rising. They're rising in the United States as well as the rest of the world. In terms of military victory, still very far because you're doing aerial strikes, and the kind of regime change that will happen with just the aerial strikes, we know is quite difficult, especially given that Iran continues to attack its neighboring countries from where there is actually this kind of firing happening. So at this point of time, it seems to be a very, very uphill task for the United States, whatever be the kind of statements that may be coming out of Washington, D.C.
Well, I don't think it's an uphill task at all. I think the United States has even said that we are ahead of schedule in terms of our goals and our military dominance over Iran. And what you're seeing is the military operational goals are being met. They're being met ahead of schedule. The other stuff that goes on in Iran as these military goals happen is about how it's being perceived by the Iranian people. The regime they're seeing their regime cannot defend them. And so that is a political question that's just going to snowball as the United States continues to succeed. And I don't think we can predict how long exactly that will take and when, additionally, we have to think about when the Iranian people may want to come back to the streets. It's not safe for them to do so now, et cetera, all of those questions. But regime change is, in terms of the U.S. military, is sort of a secondary effect. It's not the immediate goals of the military operations.
It's not an immediate goal. Is that really the case? And let me bring in Arman Mahmoodian on that note. Arman Mahmoodian, regime change is not really, something that's on the agenda. It is more the nuclear weapons, and that goalpost somehow keeps shifting every now and then. And the larger question is this, that with continuing attacks on whether it's oil refineries or other civilian targets along with military targets, do you believe that what Sierra Claire said, that, the situation of the collapse of the regime is imminent? Do you agree with that contention?
It's a good question. It's very hard to, the assessment that the previous guest made, either confirm it or deny it, because White House also position keep changing. But if we go to the day one of the war, the first hour of the war started by the attack by the entire political echelon of the Iranian leadership. The office of president was attacked. The office of supreme leader was attacked. It seems also the National Security Council been attacked. So if you look at it, the day that they move forward with the decapitulation and removal of the senior high ranks, it seems to me that the regime change actually was the top priority. And we also have to keep in mind the political pretext of the fight against Iran. It was the January protest when the Iranian people went for the dozens of the time on the street to protest against regime oppression, corruption, unemployment, basically a half a century of tyranny against them. And the regime response was all the school use of violence, but this time they kind of overkilled it. It seems that they killed about 35 to 40,000 people of their own citizens. And that gave somewhat of a political pretext. And at the very beginning of the military strikes against Iran, it was President Trump who said once that I paid my debt to the Iranian people, because initially in January, he invited the Iranian people
But Arman, where are all those protesters who are on the streets of Tehran and other cities of Iran? I don't see them protesting. The protesters who are on the streets
American official
right now.
Secretary of the War mentioned that staying home. The commander of the CENTCOM mentioned that stay in your home. Almost all of the U.S. military officials says that at this point, stay in your home because the country is under the bombardment. You need neither the U.S. nor the opponents of the regime outside.
President Trump has been asking for people to come out and reclaim the regime or change the regime. That's what he said multiple times. Now, that obviously does not seem to be echoing with the people of Iran, who are perhaps not happy with the fact that it's civilian facilities, oil depots, etc., that are under attack from the U.S.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't have any polling that what the Iranian people feel. But what I do know that historically speaking, peoples, specifically speaking, social unrest won't take place as long as there's an aerial campaign. They usually take place after the aerial campaign, because the aerial campaign creates a security vacuum, a window of the opportunity for protesters to seize the street. Would they take that opportunity or not? It's very too soon to say. Time will tell.
Arman, look at, I'll just take you through yesterday's pictures. And in fact, I'm going to request for producers to bring up those pictures. Anybody staying in a city where the sky has gone completely black because of the kind of smoke, because there's not just acid rain, but there's oil raining from the skies. And there are serious healthcare concerns from cancer to the most debilitating of diseases that are predicted. I mean, it doesn't take much to imagine what the feeling would be of the people, of who has got them into this position.
Well, there is no doubt that people are not happy with the current, the current situation. It's unsafe. The country is under the bombardment. They may hate the regime, but they like the country. They love their country mostly. But we also should keep in mind the fact that people are not really satisfied with the current state of Iran doesn't necessarily mean that they don't blame the regime for the current circumstances.
Yeah.
We've been put through the last half a century into a asymmetric rivalry and adversary, which is way out of Iran's league, out of Iran's capacity, and also out of Iran's national interests. The fight with the Israelis and the Americans is something that to some extent got us here, and it wasn't really never in our national interest, naturally. It is Islamic Republic that put it. And I think people put part of the blame on the regime foreign policy too. I'm not sure that there's...
All right, there's a breaking update coming in. This is US Senator John Kennedy, who's a Republican, and on the bombing of the girls' school in Iran, he's come out to say that it was terrible. We made a mistake. Other countries do that sort of thing intentionally, like Russia. We would never do that intentionally. I think the department is investigating it now. I'm sorry. I'm just so sorry it happened. It was a mistake. Tatiana, before I come across to you, I want Dr. Jeffrey Gunter to answer that. Because now you have a situation where even Republican senators are coming out to apologize for this. This is obviously a huge embarrassment for the United States.
I don't know if it's a huge embarrassment. Look, there's things that happen in the setting of war. I personally hold the Iranian terrorist regime responsible for the death and destruction of what's happening in Iran right now. They've killed 35,000 of their own people. So let's not forget who the real terrorist is here, the real evilness is here, and it is a shame. It happens. I'm sure it will be fully investigated and be incredibly transparent, which is the greatness of America. I have great respect for Senator Kennedy. I know him. He's a friend of mine, a reputable person. But all this will be hashed out in due time. The great news is the Ayatollah is gone. Their navy is at the bottom of the sea. Their missiles are down to about 90% less than what they were launching before. Their drones are down. It will be a great day for the Iranian people, and any death and destruction that you see right now is a result of the terrorist Ayatollah and the way that they held the Iranian people. The great Iranian people have been held captive by these maniacal, theocratic, terrorist government.
Tatiana, has the Ayatollah gone? Because the last I checked, there was a new Ayatollah who's come in. And what exactly is Putin trying to do in this? Is he trying to give Trump an off-ramp with his latest statement?
Oh, God, no. Look, I mean, first of all, you're exactly right, you know, and that's what we've been discussing a week ago. And at the time where half of our US counterparts were singing a very different tune because they were all suggesting that the result is the regime change. And we were discussing the fact that it is going to be a new election. There's going to be a new supreme leader. And again and again and again, there is not enough times that we can say that we've seen US sponsor regime change in different parts of the world. Not once has it successfully been done by bombing something from the sky. And to anybody who would want to bring up what happened in Syria, you know, might I remind you how many people have died and have been have been killed, murdered by the hands of the so-called new democratic leadership. Look, as far as what we've heard from President Trump, yet again, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think that he's very, very kind of sticking to his own guns. There is a reason behind everything that he says. He calls it excursion and not a war because technically, well, there are no American boots on the ground. So that's kind of not a war because the US is very far away. You know, Iranian drones cannot target, the US targets. They are instead targeting US targets in the region. So there is a sense to him because once he utters the word war, that creates a very different perspective in the media, specifically from the American population. He's making fun, we're looking at him making fun of the situation, kind of sounding nonchalant. That is extremely good for the American public because the American public then sees him as this strong man having fun, just sinking ships, having an excursion, and coming out victorious. He is brilliant at manipulating the media. We've been talking, all we've done for this week, we've been talking about a regime change. That was never really a goal of his. The goal is the economy. The goal is the oil.
But what really is going to happen, because, according to Antonio Costa, who's, of course, the EU Council President, he says that Russia has been the only winner from the war in the Middle East as the energy prices soar and all the attention goes away from Ukraine. Tatiana, so is that, do you agree with that contention of Mr. Costa?
No, that's quite editorialized, if I might say, because of course we're not the only winner from the soaring oil prices. Again, might I remind you that at the beginning of the year, the US just happened to fall on very vast oil reserves that they have since already started, by their own accord, their own admission, selling. So the US is going to profit massively from soaring oil prices.
Okay.
And yet again, yes, it does take some of the attention off of Ukraine. It's not going to take a lot of it because, we are still living in a situation where American media are driving kind of the narrative game. And the American media are still going to do everything to excuse what's going on in Iran.
There's some in the American media actually reporting from on ground in Iran. I don't know how they will control that narrative, but let me quickly bring in some breaking news coming in.
You've heard the ambassador, saying that it's the greatness of American nation and all of the lovely words that he used, This is exactly it. At the end of the day, they're going to justify it.
Well, obviously, the US will justify their position, as every country will. I'm sure Russia will justify its own position as well. Yes, General Raj Shukla wants to comment on this. Yes, General Shukla.
I want to make a couple of points. I respect the American military as a very professional military. So I'm quite confident that this incident in Menab, once it's investigated, and if they have made a mistake, they will apologize. Number two is, there's less than somber observations being made by Mr. Trump about the fun of sinking ships. I think in a week or so, he'll realize that war is very serious business, because there are two challenges before the American military today. One is to move from standoff to stand-in targeting. That doesn't seem to be happening. Stand-in targeting is, when you have complete control of the skies, you move into these JDAMs and these cheaper ammunitions from the Tomahawks. That has not happened, and therefore you find the Iranians responding. Let me also just underline this fact that I don't think the Americans estimated this exponential response from Iran. They thought they will respond in a linear fashion. But now that the Iranians have struck this entire arc, 3,000 kilometers from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea, sending these oil and energy shocks, they are reaching America home. The prices at the petrol pumps, the body bags, the democratic scrutiny, and that is what is the main challenge before President Trump. And the last point, if you want regime change, if you want the Iranians to surrender, you have to shed blood. Now, who's going to shed blood? You cannot do this kind of stuff despite all the support that you have from the Kurds, because you are up against a million-strong Iranian apparatus. IRGC 2 lakhs, Basij 4 lakhs, the Artish about 8 lakhs. And the other thing that has happened, I see no signs of defections, no protests on the street. So from the American point of view, I'm worried.
Right.
This grand display of air power is not going to convert into, geopolitical effects.
Sierra Claire, respond to the general, because he says this grand display of air power is not going to help the regime there or the government there in the United States, and he's explained reasons why. For instance, what happened to the Strait of Hormuz? I thought US was supposed to clear out that entire area and get the oil tankers moving. Clearly, they've not been able to do that 10 days into the war.
Well, they've started to do it. President Trump just announced yesterday that we have Navy ships sweeping for mines in the Strait of Hormuz. But in terms of the air power and what it's doing is, if you look at, first of all of the leadership ranks have been taken out, and we're looking now at the IRGC operating, on a very independent basis, almost rogue basis in many cases, and they're making a lot of mistakes. They're targeting people like Azerbaijan, they're targeting their Gulf neighbors, and that's just creating more will for the American side. And so you're seeing they don't have a strategy. I mean, if they were operating strategically, then they wouldn't be doing those type of things. And the American air power is to achieve the military goals, which is to destroy the missile programs, destroy the drone production facilities. That is the phase that we're moving into now.
Okay.
We've just begun it, but we are moving.
But it will be a challenge because a lot of it is underground, I believe, and through a network of tunnels, etc. So it won't be as easy because Iran is also a huge geographical area. But there's some quick updates I want to bring in for our viewers. Indigo has issued a travel advisory. They say they're working closely with relevant authorities to gradually rebuild the flight network in Middle East, enabling customers to reunite with their loved ones and continue their journeys. Indigo is going to operate flights to 8 destinations across Middle East, along with select routes to Europe, subject to prevailing safety conditions and regulatory approvals. There's more breaking news coming in. In fact, this is quite important, particularly for air travelers, because Air India Group has announced a phased expansion of a fuel surcharge on its domestic and international routes, necessitated by the steep rise in jet fuel prices arising from the geopolitical situation in the Gulf region. Shefali, while the government of India may have assured that it's not going to hit jet fuel prices, ATF prices at the moment, that's not the same case with countries across the world, because across geographies, the price of jet fuel has sharply risen, and this is why international and domestic passengers are now going to have to pay for it.
Right, Madhav, earlier also we have reported on jet fuel prices, impact of jet fuel prices on airlines, and through different airlines, through sources, we have reported how the airfare is going to impact it, and it is going to get costlier. Air India Group is the first airline to announce a phased introduction of fuel surcharges now on both domestic and international flights, which means for passenger traveling both domestic or internationally, for them, the prices are going to go up. The airlines say to move after a sharp aviation turbine fuel prices, which has been triggered by the geopolitical situation in
Okay. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Shefali, thanks so much for joining us with a quick update. Let me bring in Arman Mahmoodian on that. Arman Mahmoodian, the question on many people's minds is what's going to happen from here on? Now, while global prices may have come down a bit by the statements coming in from the G7, so on and so forth, how long will they be able to do this? Because it's quite clear that, if the fighting continues, then the number, for instance, of oil facilities that have been impacted in the Middle East, clearly that's going to start showing in just a matter of days from now.
Well, you mean in terms of the continuing their attacks through projectiles?
Yes, the attacks on projectiles, as well as both depots in Iran, as well as other Middle Eastern countries being taken out. Where's the oil going to come from if there's no processing happening?
Well, the Iranian attack, the continuous of unsustainability of it really depends on the tempo of the attack, to what extent and what number or volume of the projectiles they want to launch and how much launchers they have left. Israelis yesterday announced that Iran still has about 100 launches left. It's at the 75% of the launching capability being destroyed. But Iran still has the drones. So I think Iran can continue for 3 to 4 more weeks by the combination of the missiles and the drones, but not in the volume of the first days of the war. It's not going to be a 3-digit. I think it's going to be the total projectile is going to be the 2-digit, something between 35 to 50, combination of drone and missile for, let's say, the 2 to 3 weeks.
Right.
As the time goes by, the impact of it is going to decrease because the volume has to decrease. The other issue that Iranians have is just at some point, Iran neighbors are going to respond. The Arab states of the Persian Gulf, the Azerbaijans, the Turks, and whoever is being aim of that. There is just so much that they can take because they also have domestic concerns. as a state, at some point, your people expect you to chip in and to respond and retaliate.
Okay. Will the neighbors retaliate? Tatiana Kugreva, I want you to come in on that because, you know, we all know that Russia and Iran have had traditionally very good ties, even when it comes to drones, for instance, supplied by Iran to Russia during its war with Ukraine. What are we looking at in terms of the role that Russia and China can play in coming days? Because there's already a lot of talk about whether there's some kind of intelligence sharing or information sharing that is happening from Russia's side to help Iran.
Well, look, we've seen President Putin speak to the Iranian president already twice since the beginning of the excursion. Let's stick to Donald Trump's language. For the kicks of it, I believe that the Iranian president has thanked Vladimir Putin for the humanitarian aid and for the support. But let's be very clear, you know, we're talking about big states, big civilized states. So there's not going to be any sort of participation on the part of Russia without a formal request for it. Just as necessary by the book of the law, by the letter of the law, you know, and a country asks for help and then the help is provided. And even when we respond to a request for help, you know, even then we're being called names because, again, you know, there are just some countries that are allowed a little bit more in the eyes of the world. So without the proper, you know, communication, again, any participation, even in terms of how it would look, you know, any sort of participation by a third party on the part of Iran would suggest that Iran can't handle its business.
Okay.
And with all due respect to my fellow panelists, we can't know just how much ammo Iran has.
Sure.
And I have a better question for you. How much ammo does the US still have?
That's a big question. In fact, let me bring in the general on the panel on that. General Shukla, how much ammo does Iran have? How much staying power does the US have? Because, you know, in terms of the disproportionality of the cost, that is one aspect that has been spoken about. And I want to ask you, as somebody who's seen this for a very long time, are we looking at a repeat of what we saw in Gaza, a long period of aerial attacks, followed eventually by some kind of a ground invasion, and a long war at that?
Yeah, so interesting questions. You know, the first, what do the Iranians have left? What is their residual capacity? I'm told from a number of sources that they had 400 launchers, out of which 300 have been taken out. So that's very bad news for the Iranians, only 100 left. But insofar as the missiles are concerned, I'm told they had 3,000, about 1,000 have been expended, 2,000 remain, and the more dangerous ones, Fateh 1, Fateh 2, which are the hypersonics, have not been used. Insofar as the Shahid drones are concerned, it is reasonable to assume that the supply will be quite uninterrupted. So that is insofar as the Iranians are concerned. As far as the Americans are concerned, their interceptor stock is also running out. I'm told in the 11 odd days so far, they have consumed 1/3 of their global stockpile. So they have had to move interceptors from South Korea, Japan. I think yesterday President Trump chaired a meeting with Raytheon, THAAD, Patriot, looking at ways to accelerate munition production. They have set up a munition acceleration council. So the missile maths, you know, as General Patriot puts it, still remains very relevant. Apart from that, I want to make two other quick points. As the American ships close in on the Strait of Hormuz, you know, trouble may begin because those fast-track small Iranian crafts, that is when they will come into play. And the last point I wish to make is that, you know, if I'm sitting in Beijing, I'll be so happy at the American excursion, and I will hope that it becomes a longer diversion. Because this is exactly what happened in 2001 when the Americans put their hand into the Iraqi and Afghanistan beehives. Right. China used that time to close the strategic military lag. And if America gets sucked into this long war, this will be the time for China to gain a strategic military ascendancy. So in many ways, if Trump does not conclude this in the next week or 10 days and he gets sucked into a long war, it's bad news for the United States on many fronts.
All right, let's leave it there. Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, Tatiana Kukreva, as well as Dr. Jeffrey Gutta, Sierra Claire, as well as Arman Mahmoodian. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening.